What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the first ever episode of the Great Strength Debate. I'm your host, Connor Lyons, and today I sat down with a colleague of mine. His name is Paul Oneid. And me and Paul go back about 15 years, and he's actually the coach who introduced me to the principles and philosophies coming out of Westside Barbell. If you benefited from my training or even some of the writings that I've done, i.e. go by the dynamic effort method for athletes. If you've benefited from any of that, you have Paul to thank because he's the guy that really first got me interested in learning more about it. This episode's about an hour long. We go over all kinds of stuff from running a business to like what do you want out of life to training principles, literally a little bit of everything. So sit back, relax, enjoy it, and we'll see you at the end.
Test the heat, more muscle, can't retreat in this ring. Strength the legs!
Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the Great Strength Debate, the first ever episode. I'm here with Paul Oneid, a former colleague of mine. We met back in 2010 at the University of South Florida, where we were part of a, there was 15 intern class. Working under Ron McKeefrey, Frank Wintrick, Mark Hickok. All these guys kind of went on to do some pretty amazing things. I'll tell you what, that was probably that was a really talented internship class, but it was like to compare it to hockey, it was like we had a bunch of AAA guys and then half the guys were rec, if that makes sense. Anyways, Paul, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, man.
Yeah, so my name is Paul Oneid. I am the founder and owner of Master Athletic Performance, which is an online coaching company based here out of Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I'm also the lead educator for Coaches Corner University, where I do continuing education for coaches and personal trainers, as well as mentor other coaches on how to build their businesses and find a coaching practice. You know, after USF, I think back to those times. You know, for me, I was doing my master's degree at USF and interning at the same time. From there, I went on to be the assistant at Robert Morris University, working with I think they had 21 varsity sports. After Robert Morris, where I did my second master's degree in sports management, my first one being exercise science at USF, I went and I was the associate director at the University of Tampa. And then I was the director of strength and conditioning at Queen's University up here in Canada. That was around 2015, where I left college strength and conditioning, went into the private sector, worked in disability rehab for a number of years while building my online business. Also have a background as a powerlifter. So I was at one point I was ranked in the top 10 all time in 2 different weight classes. And now I'm just a guy who loves to train. I've competed in a bodybuilding show and probably will again. Married to an amazing wife who's IFBB pro. We live here in Ottawa with our 3 pups.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, so let's kind of start at the beginning here back at USF. So Paul's actually the guy, you, Petrosino, and Skylar Farley, man. Were the ones who kind of introduced me to like a conjugate method and like the principles at Westside. And that was, I kind of dived headfirst into that as far as, let's see, it's been 15 years now. So I've had 15 years to kind of work with it and bend it to kind of the needs of my athletes, right? That was, I think it was you, man, that originally said when we were talking about it, because I came from like a very functional background, right? I had interned under Jason Riley for like a year working with, he was Derek Jeter's guy. So everything was like, the load wasn't nearly as important. It was more like patterning and all that. So kind of diving into a template that was created for powerlifters was kind of pretty foreign to me. But I remember you telling me it's the thinking man's template, right? Because you can bend it to your will. And I remember just kind of sitting down and reading all of it and trying to figure out how to do that. And I feel like I've done a pretty good job of that over the years. I'll say 2 guys that really got me thinking, or 3 guys that got me thinking really differently about it. Joe DeFranco, obviously, West Side for Skinny Bastards. Nate Harvey with his conjugate U. And
Hmm.
dude, Chandler Marchman, you remember him? Mantler?
Absolutely. I was
Yeah.
chatting with him the other day.
Yeah. Chandler was probably here in Tampa, like the first guy, like on a commercial level, to really marry powerlifting principles with athletic, because he had what's it? Is it Elite Strength and Conditioning? I think was the name of the
Yep.
facility he owned.
Yep.
So those guys really changed my thought processes on a lot of things. And to kind of kick it back to you, I know with a powerlifting background and having a lot of kind of West Side underpinnings early on in your career, what are your principles now? Like, what are the things that you find are most important? Because I know you work with a variety of clientele. Like, what would you say? I guess principles are a better term than philosophy.
Yeah.
What would you say those are now?
So this is one where I have really changed over the years. When we met, I was very married to my belief systems, and I felt like there was one best way to accomplish something. And I think in doing so and taking that approach, I lost sight of the true beauty of a concurrent method, like a conjugate, concurrent, whatever you
Right.
want to call it,
Yeah.
of athlete preparation. And I use the term athlete broadly because no matter whether you're dealing with a youth who is participating in sport, or a college athlete, or someone in the corporate world who just wants to train hard and perform well, they're an athlete in whatever part of their life they're trying to improve. So all of our clients are athletes. And when you look at the way that we train that person, it's going to be based on their needs. Not every person needs to be maximally strong. Not every person needs to be maximally conditioned. But all of these systems interact with one another to form what I look at as like a pie chart of an ideal athlete for that individual. And the beauty of the concurrent method being the thinking man's template is you can play with the pieces of that pie chart as much as you want, as long as you understand the trade-offs involved in doing so. So if you're dealing with an athlete who really enjoys aerobic work, well, you can do a lot of aerobic work, understanding that it's probably going to limit the amount of force output that they're going to have in their strength work. So how do you have your cake and eat it too, to allow them to actually get strong and then be able to have the output aerobically that they need to have in order to progress their mileage or progress their times? So for me, it really came from the perspective of opening up my mind to the different ways we can manipulate the system. I am not the quote that I've had over the last little bit is I'm completely agnostic to methodologies, but I'm religious about results. So I really don't care about how we get to where we need to go, as long as you're enjoying it, as long as you're putting your full effort into it, and as long as we are getting the results that we're after. It's on me as the coach to have a massive toolbox to be able to give you what you need when you need it in the amounts that you need it to get you to where you want to go. I have yet to run across someone who is unable to be helped with this sort of approach, because it really molds to whatever you need it to. And when you get even you talked about Jason Riley being more of a movement focused coach. There's elements of that are absolutely important,
Oh
but
yeah.
there's also trade-offs involved because you don't have enough loading.
Right.
But if you implement too much loading, well, now you're going to have decreases in relative range of motion that are going to limit your ability to move through space. So how do you dose that, each one of those stimulus, to get the adaptation that you're after? And that's going to be different from each person, because some people are more susceptible to losses in relative range of motion. Some people are more susceptible to having lower recovery capacities from high intensity work versus low intensity aerobic work. And that comes from building that coach athlete relationship, tracking metrics over time, and building yourself almost this profile of an athlete. And that's kind of the way that we approach it now. Each one of our athletes is unique. We have a massive toolbox of ways in which we can help them. And I use that pie chart example as, well, if I have 100% recovery capacity, how much of that percentage is devoted to which stimulus and which adaptation I'm trying to train?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'd say I've had the same kind of thought process too, right? Because I was put in a position where I was working like combine prep, right? And I think
Yep.
like a conjugate template is like tailor made for combine prep because you've got to get the most out of an athlete that you can in a very short period of time, right? You've got like between I don't know 6 and 8 weeks, depending on if they're like an actual combine guy or if they're like a early March pro day guy, right? So, yeah, about 12 weeks at the high end. Um, and then when I got out of that, it was hard for me to wrap my brain around a more long-term athletic development. You know, when it
Yep.
comes to when it comes to programming, and that was really when I started kind of digging into, and not even just like the source material, right, from a guy like Louis or even like a Harvey or a DeFranco. You know, it involved going back and reading like Bondarchuk, like the original source material, right, where it all
Yep.
comes from, and understanding that like a conjugate template is just it's a Bulgarian template. That's really what it is. Like at the end of the day, like a conjugate or concurrent, you know, Russian conjugate sequencing system, whatever you want to call it, is really a modified version of a Bulgarian method designed to give you a quote unquote max effort stimulus like in 3 different ways throughout the week. And that's what I found. And I found that bending, especially the max effort work, and you'd probably agree with me here, when it comes to my athletes, I'd say the max effort work is the one that kind of gets pulled back the most just because they don't have it a lot of the time, especially you're talking about in season. You know, we'll do like a modified max effort type
Yep.
approach, I guess you could call it. But yeah, I'm kind of with you over the course of the past 15 years from when we met. It really changed my mind on a lot of things. I was very much so married, just like you, to that, like to the percentages, to the approach, to the loads that are spelled out like in the book of methods, and then getting into those, you know, other coaches and their writings and how they manipulated things and how they changed things and varied things, like really kind of helped me change my perspective a lot. And then having that background with Jason kind of allowed me to understand that that load first is not always necessarily the best approach, if that makes sense.
Well, dude, there's a lot that you can tease out of what you just said. So even like, so let's talk max effort training.
Right.
Max effort training just means full effort into a barbell, probably into, like, I'm going to quote barbell,
Right.
for 1 to 3, maybe 5 repetitions. So you're hitting a repetition max.
Right.
Now, who's to say that that needs to be max effort in terms of absolute load,
Right.
right? So the most load that we can lift. Why couldn't we choose variations of the competition lifts that force us to underload,
Right.
right? So if you take a back squat versus a front squat, you've already cut your absolute load by about 20%.
Right.
Now you go to a Zercher squat. Maybe that's another 10% off that top end.
Right.
You're still getting max force output
Right.
into the floor through the body. Now you implement some sort of accommodating resistance, and that absolute load and that stretch position comes down. Now you implement some sort of isometric, and that absolute load comes down. So when you're talking about in season versus off season, you can still implement max effort training, but the way in which it's implemented, rather than looking at absolute load, well, let's standardize for rate of perceived exertion
Right.
and bring that absolute load down. Now we're accommodating for recovery capacity. And so this is what I talk about when I'm like, have your cake and eat it too. We can still train these qualities, but the way in which that we do train these qualities is going to vary. In the in season, you're probably going to be focusing more on dynamic effort training.
Right.
You're probably not going to be pushing a lot of sets to failure because your recovery capacity is lower. So hypertrophy is going to kind of take a back seat to maintenance. And when you look at maintenance of muscle tissue, well, the volume of work that I need to do to maintain muscle tissue is 30% of the volume of work I need to build muscle tissue.
Right.
That's fucking nothing. So who's to say that we won't maintain muscle tissue just through the work that we're doing in our max effort and dynamic effort work? You could probably take that hypertrophy work away, focus more on movement capacity, restoring relative motion and mobility. Well, now, like, that's an athlete model. Like, it doesn't have to be some super complicated thing. In the in the implementation, it doesn't have to be complicated, but until you go back and read those source materials to truly understand where these methodologies came from. And this is something I talk about a lot with the young coaches I work with. When you read the West Side Book of Methods, or, you listen to Nate talk about, on Conjugate U, or even the way that Chandler implemented it with his, the man cave programming, it's like, that's just their interpretation of those source materials.
Right.
So you and I could read the same book, like you and I could both read Periodization by Tudor Bompa and come out with two different interpretations of that book. And
Got it
to
behind.
me, yeah, exactly. Like, to me, that's the art of coaching. That's
Right.
the art of being able to have this toolbox of information and understanding how it applies to the person in front of you. So, that's just talking about max effort and manipulating the system. And then you come back to, like, how do I further my knowledge? And to me, that comes from an awareness of the gaps and kind of putting your ego away. If you are married to a system, or I'll just use a great example. So in social media, you have these people who've built their entire personas off of some sort of philosophy or camp that they belong
Right.
to. If you adopt that sort of mindset, you are limiting your ability to help people.
Oh yeah.
Right. So when you approached me about, like, the great strength debate, I was like, I think I can talk a lot about these things, but I have a feeling it won't be much of a debate because I'm so agnostic to methodologies,
Yeah.
and because everything has their place. And now, we talked a little bit before about people consuming information on the internet and then thinking that they understand. It's like, I'm sorry, but 90 seconds is not enough time for you to learn about a concept.
Right. Well, that's all we
And
get now, though. You know what I mean?
Yep.
That's the attention spans are getting less and less. Man, you've probably seen it. I can put a reel on Instagram, right? Because they'll let you go up to like 3 minutes now. That is packed with information. It's 2.5 minutes to 3 minutes long, and it does not just catch. Nobody cares. I'll put a 30-second one out, just filled with absolute bullshit nonsense. And you know what I mean? It'll blow up. It's wild, the attention spans that we no longer have. It's I thought Vine was bad, but like TikTok and Instagram have made it exceptionally.
The average watch time on a reel is probably going to be less than 8 seconds.
Right.
So even if it's like a 60-second reel packed with information, they're not getting that full amount of information. Unless you are very good at hooking their attention and keeping them interested and using all of these sort of marketing tactics. But it's something that I speak about a lot with regards to Coach's Corner University. The way that I teach and the way that, traditional education has been for the last little bit, I think it's actually I think it's a race to zero, because at some point very soon, AI is going to be able to give better answers to questions than I ever could.
Yep.
But what is missing? It's the actual context, application, and adjustments based on the person in front of you. So when I think about the way I want to educate, it has very little to do now with teaching the nuts and bolts, X's and O's, and it has everything to do with the art of coaching.
Right.
So like when I teach courses now, it's not lectures. It's, I usually teach courses with a collaborator. So now our lectures, quote unquote, are just really like a series of podcasts where we talk back and forth about concepts and have discussions, because that's what you're not going to be able to get with AI.
Right.
And I think for us as coaches who are working in person, or in a one-on-one setting or a one-to-many setting with athletes, the way in which we communicate our information needs to be geared towards the needs of that individual and breaking down those limiting beliefs that they're coming to you with. And I'm sure you see it working with youth athletes. Hey, coach, I saw this exercise. I need to do it. Yeah. And now you're in a situation where you're like, well, I can't tell them that that's dumb.
Right.
But how can I tell them that it might be good, but just not for them?
Right. Yeah, I mean, so that's a big issue. We talked about that like off before we got going here. Athletes coming to you with various perceptions that they picked up on social media from a various influencer. Or one thing that I'm having a harder time with is I will get guys who are, I don't know, quote unquote, like higher level by the time they get 15, 16, 17. Like, for instance, I had a kid who was 18 playing the USHL, was eligible for the draft, right? And just highly skilled athlete who had never been in the gym before, right? This guy is getting calls from like NHL teams about getting drafted, had never really lifted a weight in his life. He ended up getting drafted. It worked out for him, but then on the flip side of it, I get these kids who have been to other facilities, right? And you've been down here in Tampa, so you probably remember some of the players from back in the day, right? Whether it's like Impact Fitness or fucking Yo Murphy, or some of these guys who aren't necessarily providing like the best stimulus for the athlete, and kind of undoing a lot of the coaching or lack thereof, right, that happened previously. So these kids will go somewhere like maybe 11, 12, 13, 14, and then their training, it needs to change because, right, they're outside of the low training age, like easy quote unquote gains, and they need somebody who's going to be able to manipulate all the different variables for them and really help get them stronger and more powerful and faster. And then they get here, dude, and they cannot move. Like it's brutal, but telling them that everything they've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years was wrong is like an impossibility, because you're going to crush any chance at a relationship that you had with that athlete.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm sure the same thing happens with the general population too. But that's one thing that's like a very big barrier, because those relationships you develop when you're 10, 11, 12, 13 with a coach, dude, that's a hard one to break. It is very hard.
Yeah. And I also don't think it's beneficial to tell them it was wrong. Like, because inherently I don't think it was wrong. Because if they got better, something worked, right? It worked until it didn't.
Right.
And that's why they're coming to you.
Right.
And so for me, it's leveraging the fact that, hey, you got to where you are. Obviously, you know how to work hard. Obviously, you know how to follow a plan. Obviously, there are a lot of movement capacities that you've gained over time that have allowed you to perform at the level that you are performing at. But now your needs have changed. And so we're going to change the way that we train. We're going to change the way that we approach the things that we do. And when you have that sort of mentality, they're like, oh yeah, he sees me. He sees that I'm not just, twiddling my thumbs in a corner. He sees that I actually want to get better.
Right.
And you immediately have that buy-in with the young athlete. And that's actually one of the things that, honestly, it's one of the things that I miss the most about the college world, is that 18 to 22 year old is such an impactful time for the rest of their lives. Yeah. Because I know that you fully buy into this, that most of the kids that come through your doors are not going pro.
No.
But you know what they are going pro at? Life.
Oh yeah.
And how many of I know your story and, the challenges that you've had, how many of those challenges you were able to overcome because of the lessons that you learned under a barbell?
Oh yeah.
Probably all of them.
Barbells in sports, man. 100%.
So your ability as a coach to form a relationship, create links from A to B to C in terms of, implementation, effort, execution, and how that transfers outside those four walls. If you try to tell the kid that everything they did up until that point sucked, you're going to lose them and you're never going to get them.
Yeah. Now it's a tough part with it, and I don't envy because it's probably the last 10 years it's changed a whole lot. Because I can remember early on at USF, at the athletes compound, you'd be getting guys who didn't have like a strength guy growing up. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But now at the university level, at the pro level, 95% of the kids coming through and adults coming through, they've had a strength coach for most of their life. Right. Yeah. And now they're coming into a situation where everything is changing. Right. Because it could be, from a movement perspective, like this new coach is married to specific movements or, philosophies or whatever the case is, like you walk into a situation and now everything is completely different. And I can imagine as an athlete, it's really hard when you put stock in the fact that like your strength guy or your strength gal got you to where you are. You know what I mean? And then
Mm-hmm.
now everything's changed. And I think that's a good point that you made to tell them that, their needs change because they're now at a different level and they're in a different position. So to be able to explain that to them, even though they may not be receptive at first, is a good way to approach that. I think that's a good point.
One of the other things that you could look at too is finding the commonalities, because not what you're even if the system that you're implementing or the framework that you're implementing is like very far divorced from their previous one,
Right.
there are still a lot of commonalities. Like say you're someone who focuses a lot, or that athlete needs to focus now on like max force output. That doesn't mean that you're just going to be coming in and slinging weights.
Right.
We're still going to be moving with intent. We're still going to be moving with purpose. We're still going to be focusing on, foot pressure contact, bracing, all of these qualities that they likely worked on with their previous movement guy
Right.
transfer into the work that you're doing. So rather than pointing out the ways that you're different, point to the ways that you are more similar and that you're actually using their previous motor education to build the qualities that now they need.
Right.
And I think it's going to be a more sustainable way to form that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, because that, like you said, I don't remember if you said it on air or off, but all of this as a coach, like our job is to build relationships. That's really what it is. I remember it was Frank Winchard, man, back at USF.
Me too.
That you could be as smart, you could be unbelievably smart, best strength coach on the planet, but they're not going to care what you know until they know that you care about them, right? So you've got to develop that relationship early on, and yeah, that's huge. That's good advice. Like I like that. So
yeah, I mean, Frank was the first person to introduce me to that, because I came in as very much like an X's and O's, like you're going to do what I tell you to do. Then I had the pleasure of working with Todd Hammer at Robert Morris, and Todd is one of the most caring, like person first coaches that I've ever had the pleasure of working with. And he sat with me one day and he's like, man, you know everything you need to know about training. Now you need to learn about people.
yeah.
And it was at that point that I really started diving into the psychology of motivation, the different ways to communicate, and also just realized that until I have the buy-in of the individual, I won't have their effort.
Right.
And to me, that really hit a light bulb. And then it was further ingrained in me when I was working in disability rehab, because, I go from MFing kids in a weight room to trying to convince Karen that her agoraphobia is limiting her ability to go, get her mail from the mailbox.
Right.
That's a completely different type of communication strategy that you're going to do. I remember actually, so, coming out, I wasn't as tattooed as I am wearing a hoodie, so you can't really tell, but like I have neck tattoos, like I'm 240 pounds. Like,
right.
But at the time I remember showing up to an in-person interview at a woman's home, and she wouldn't let me in the door.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, this is different. I need to present myself in a different way. So at that point it was, all right, my beard's going to be nicely trimmed. I'm going to show up wearing my glasses. I'm going to wear a long sleeve shirt,
Yeah.
Just the way I presented myself changed the dynamic of the relationship. Yeah. So the way that you present yourself, the way that you choose your words, the way that you show up with your posture, all of these things impact relationships, especially in person. Now, when you try to translate that online, well, I'll be the first to tell you, you don't need fancy software to coach a person. But I'll tell you what, as soon as we got our own app and people saw that, all right, when I work with Master Athletic Performance, they've got their own app and all their videos have, demos, and that professional approach to what we're trying to do completely changed the buy-in of the people that are working with us. And now all of a sudden they're more motivated. They're more willing to stay with us long-term. And you might not think it's like, I don't need these things to coach. It's like, you don't need them,
right?
but they probably help.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure for you, you show up to train a group and you're fucking, beard unshaven, shirt untucked, and they're like, oh, this guy doesn't care about us. Whereas I know for a fact you fucking care and you want to
Right.
be there and you want the best for them. But perception is reality.
Yeah.
And all this shit matters.
Oh yeah, man. Well, that to carry it back to like sports and everything, right? The look good, feel good, play good type of thing,
Oh yeah.
right? I mean, it's I can remember growing up, man. I think I was actually like interviewing to get into the athletic training program at USF, and I had to go get like a shirt because at the time, I mean, I'm 5'5". I think at the time I might have been like 215. Right, so like button up shirts.
You're a big boy.
Yeah, I'm not pulling them off the rack. I got to go get measured and all that stuff. And I remember talking to my dad because it took them 30 minutes to come talk to me to measure me. Like I was trying to find somebody, nobody would come. And my dad was like, "You're dressed like a homeless person. What do you like? What do you think they're gonna do? They're not gonna come up to you. You've got to present yourself in a manner that you want to be like addressed and treated, right?" And that was just something that, I ended up having. I don't know if you can hear my dog is, hey, sit down.
It's okay, man. He just wants to say hi.
But yeah, man, Frank, I don't know. I actually want to ask you a question about RMU. Was Jeremy Hoy there when you were there? Do you remember that name?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Jeremy. So the way the strength and conditioning department was set up was we worked with every team except men's hockey.
Okay.
Men's hockey trained off-site at Jeremy's facility.
Right.
And it was because he had a great relationship with their head coach.
Okay.
I believe that he still works with their men's hockey program.
So I worked with Jeremy with USA Hockey back in like 2018, 2019. That's where I met him. And then he took a hockey only job at Ohio State. So he was working men's and women's hockey at Ohio State for about 2 years. I think COVID kind of thrashed that. And I think he's from the videos he posts, it looks like he's just training kids out of his garage now. I'm not sure where he lives, but it's crazy.
It's a common thing, man.
Dude,
COVID changed a lot.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, you think so you were in gym ownership for a while, right? Or management?
No, thank God I never got into that. It's always been in the back of my mind that I wanted to own a facility.
Don't do it.
Yeah. No matter how much I crunched the numbers,
Yeah.
I just couldn't make it work from a financial perspective.
Yeah.
And having the free, dude, I'm the biggest advocate for online coaching because we have all the freedom in the world to help the people that we want to be working with and also live our lives and do the things. Like last year, we were like, winter kind of sucks. Let's go to Houston. So we just threw our laptops and our pups in the truck and drove to Houston for 3 months. So, I mean, you can't do that when you own a gym. Right.
No, I mean, it's, I'll be 41 this year, right? And those 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. days are starting to wear on me a little bit. So, and we had, 2 years ago, we had our daughter, and that kind of changed the math on everything. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's missing so much. So I can remember never wanting to own a gym. And then when I had the opportunity to do it, just throwing all that caution to the wind and being like, all right, let's go. Like, let's open a gym.
Well, there are trade-offs to everything because I'm sure opening the gym has provided you just an incredible amount of fulfillment.
Oh, yeah.
But that fulfillment also brings along with it restriction and stress. And these are trade-offs that you're willing to make. And one of the things that I talk about with the coaches that I mentor is you have to be able to tolerate trade-offs in the short term for long-term victories, as long as your direction is such that you're heading to where you want to go.
Right.
So as a gym owner, if you're able to tolerate the suck and those long days for, say, 5 to 10 years, well, but if you build your business to a point where now you have a few assistant coaches, and now you can build out a clinic and you can do all these other things to monetize the space that you're in, now you can actually take a step back, enjoy life, have a bit more freedom. I talk to my buddy Nick all the time. Nick owns Capital Strength Training Systems here in Ottawa. Nick started off with 2 business partners. Those 2 business partners burned out over time. He's by himself, but he has I think it's 8,000 square foot space that he turned a good portion of it into a clinic that is running at a high clip. He's got personal training and he's got 5 trainers that are on staff. So, and then he has an adult program on top of his athletic performance programs that he runs in junior hockey and volleyball. So, I mean, now he can relax. He doesn't have to be on the floor all the time, and he can choose what groups that he's coaching. So he works with the pro guys, he works with the high level junior guys, and then he lets his trainers do what they do, but he invests heavily into them. So you can have everything that you want to have as long as you have vision and as long as you have the ability to tolerate the trade-offs in the short term.
Yeah. I think that's what this field has become. How old are you now?
I'm 37.
Yeah, so you're about my age, same generation. I'd say all the guys I know that own gyms, I'd say a good half of them at this point are either really just planning an exit strategy. You know what I mean? Like just trying to figure out either how to sell or how to really just get out of it. Because it has changed, man. I think between I don't know, overhead wise, what your buddy's dealing with up in Ottawa, I'd imagine with the taxes it probably sucks, but
overhead's pretty bad, and that's the limiting factor in everything that you do. So not only are you paying for especially if you don't, the only way in Canada that you can make a gym work for you long term is if you own the building. Commercial real estate prices up here are very steep, utilities are very steep, insurance is steep. And then you factor in the other administrative costs, equipment, everything like that. Unless you're coming into it with a massive amount of capital or pre-existing contracts with large sport clubs, it's gonna be really tough to make it work. But at the end of the day, I was talking to Joe Conley from ASU, and I asked him, I was like, "Man, Joe, you've been in this." I think he's been in this for close to 25 years.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, why do you still do this? Like, you've got 2 young kids, you've been trekked across the country. And he's like, you have to do it for passion.
Yeah.
And if you wake up every day passionate about what you do, he was telling me now his days start, he's still up at 3:45 in the morning so that he can train before the full. But it's so he can train. Right.
Yeah.
So he's like, all right, if I wake up at 3:30 in the morning, that means that I get the evenings with my family.
Right.
So if he starts football at 6 and he's out of the building at 3:30 and he can go pick his kids up at work, he's like, I'll do that every day of the week because I still get to do the thing that I love to do and be there with my family. So it's all about trade-offs. And one thing that I think you and I both resonate with is like, we're always going to train. Right. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm looking at my schedule today. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 meetings today. Well, I'm still going to train.
Yeah.
At some point today, I have a meeting with myself for 3 hours to go train. It's like, that's going to happen. And I do this because I love training and I love teaching people about training. And that's where it's going to be. It's never going to stop.
Yeah.
But
no, it's the same way. I mean, it was. I'll tell you what. The biggest thing with ownership and management when you get right, because all the money in strength and conditioning is in those 2 things, right? Either managing, directing, or you own. And the closer you get to that, the more removed you become from the training, right? Which is really what got you into it in the first place. So that's one of those trade-offs that tends to happen with a lot of people. And, I mean, I tell interns I tell every intern that walks through my doors for the past 15 years, keep it a hobby because it will inevitably turn into a job at some point, like in your career. It may not stay that way, right? But it's going to turn into a job just like every other job at some point in your career. And you may, and I've seen it happen, completely lose your love for the iron, like just because of the way that your life has to function in order to make it work. And, they say, I forget who said it, man. It might have been like Boyle, listening to the interview with him years ago. So they say that the best strength coaches are the ones who can afford to be broke the longest. So yeah, it's
true. That's a trade-off I'm personally not willing to make.
Right.
Um, but at the end of the day, like, I still wake up fired up to do what I do every day.
Yeah.
And I know you do too. And that's why you do it. And whatever that ends up being in the next, you're 41. So let's say the next 20 years, what does that look like? Because I know at 60, you're probably not going to be on the floor.
Right.
But you're still going to be involved in the process in some capacity. And when we look at, like, you want to talk about the big strength debate, what do you really want out of your life?
Yeah. I mean,
do you want to be a millionaire?
Yeah.
Personally, I was talking to somebody yesterday. He's like, man, like, looking at the way that your business verticals are stacked, like, you could be taking home $1 million a month. And I was like, I don't fucking want that at all, ever. Yeah. Because at that point, let's draw the parallel to a facility. You don't need an admin assistant, 5 assistant coaches, a clinic full of practitioners, and all these other things, because at that point you're no longer a coach or an administrator.
Right.
So if what fires you up is coaching, build a business that allows you to sustain the living that you want to sustain with the lifestyle that you want to sustain, and then just fucking coach.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, as you mentioned, if you don't want to remove yourself from that aspect, then don't scale your business.
Right.
Just do what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, look at, you remember Scott Steifeld?
Yeah. Scott. Is he the one that bought Elite from?
Yeah. He bought Elite from Chandler, and he just had his first son.
Okay.
And he was looking at his life, and he was looking at the gym and the hours and the monetization. And he was like, this no longer makes sense for me.
Yeah.
And he shut it down.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. But
how long ago was that? Well, he made the decision that was right for him. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
And that's like I said, a lot of coaches end up in that place of deciding, is this something that I want to continue down? This is a path I want to continue to go down, or has the math on my life changed? And yeah.
But the thing is he's still involved in training and coaching.
Oh yeah.
And what he found out was that in order to sustain his business in the way that it was, he would have to divorce himself from coaching.
Right.
So he made the decision to step away. Yeah. That's ultimately your choice in what you want to do with your life. You only have one life to live, and it's your choice how you want to do that. But, coming back to the actual coaching practice, who's to say, like, this is another area where I was like, college strength is the best way to be. And I was like, maybe for some people, right. For me, it wasn't, because the lifestyle and the trade-offs were such that I wasn't willing to make those anymore. And I had to find a way to find love within a different avenue of coaching.
Right.
And what I realized was I love education. So I teach. Does my education company make me a lot of money? Absolutely not. I make way more money doing the other stuff that I'm doing, but I love doing it. So I'm going to keep doing it.
Right.
I love coaching, and coaching is the thing that makes me the most money. But I also know that after a certain point, there's a roster size for me that I can't maintain the relationships that I want to maintain.
Right.
So that caps the amount of income that you can have in that vertical. So you kind of have to find out the ways in which you want to orchestrate your company, your business, your work, so that you can live the life that you want to live.
Yeah, I think that's probably a mistake that our parents' generation made, right? It was always like, what do you want to do? What are you passionate about, right? Not what kind of lifestyle do you want to have and what's going to allow you to afford that lifestyle. You know what I mean? I think, and that's one of the things I try, again, like, to take it back to what I tell the interns, right? To keep it a hobby, but follow your passions, but realistically understand when you've got job openings at Yale, right? Posting for $22,000 a year to start out, right?
Oh.
Yeah. Like,
with a master's degree, probably.
Like, for sure. Has to be, right? I worked USA 17's dev camp over the summer with a guy. He just took a position at with the Ontario Reign. He was at Mike Boyle's spot. Okay. But he was an assistant at Merrimack right? And I don't even want to tell you what he said he was making there. You know what I mean? It's like, it's sad that so little value gets placed in some respects within positions within our field, because it's like kind of pushing talented, good coaches out of the industry in a lot of respects.
Yes and no. So again, have your cake and eat it too.
Right.
If you're doing it for passion,
Right.
you're going to be willing to to live out of your car.
Right.
You know, like when I was at Robert Morris, I was driving, a 15-year-old Toyota 4Runner. I lived in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment with another assistant coach.
Right.
We're eating the cheapest food that we can possibly find. I think I was making $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
So at that point, you're like, I just love what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I remember my first full-time position at Queen's University. So you're director of strength and conditioning. You're teaching a class in the exercise science department. You have 50 students that you have to facilitate an internship program. And you also have to work with I think it was 18 varsity sports.
Oof.
And not only that, it was a unionized position. So I was only allowed to work 37 and a half hours a week. My starting salary was $53,000. And I had 2 master's degrees.
Yeah.
Now, I could have made that work and I could have done the things I need to do. But at that point in my life, I'm 26 years old. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Yeah.
And now I know for a fact that position is paying over $80,000 a year.
Yeah.
So, things grow over time. I remember my first job offer, I think it was at VCU, was like $33,000 a year to live in Richmond, Virginia. I'm like, bro, I'm living on the corner. the cardboard box is $33,000 a year.
Oh yeah.
but they found someone to take that position.
Yep.
And you could say, oh, they wanted it more than you. It's like, yeah, probably.
Yeah. At that rate.
At that rate, right? So it really depends on what you want. I know we're like really far removed from the conversation of strength and conditioning,
Right.
but I think it's a valuable conversation to have.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that's when I first got into the field, I took my first job at $23,000 a year. And the guy gave me $1,000 to try to like buy insurance. That was like, he was like, so 24,000 a year. And I just like thinking back, man, like I don't know how I made it work. Like, you know what I mean? Like you find a way, you figure it out. But just understanding that wasn't going to be a forever position, right? You're hoping this opens some doors for you. You're able to network a little bit, meet some coaches, and maybe that leads somewhere down the road. But yeah, man, it's tough out there for early on strength coaches. In some respects, there's some great positions out there, right? Especially with the H2F programs opening up now. They're paying like 70 to 80K to work like 8 hours a day, 5 days a week from 6 a.m. until 2 p.m. You know what I mean? So they've got some options that we didn't have back then. But yeah, it's a tough world, And I will say, over the past 5 years, the interns that I get are no longer interested in the strength and conditioning side of things. They all have aspirations to go to PT or even athletic training, which I do everything I can to talk them out of. But very few of them want to be strength coaches anymore. Like it's at USF, at least, the ones that I get.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things that always comes to my mind when I'm talking to young coaches is the continuing education side of things.
Yep.
Are you seeing a willingness for young coaches to seek continuing education?
No, not broadly. I've had 2 interns that were great. They were awesome. They wanted to learn everything they could. But then I've had interns that would show up 45 minutes to an hour late every day. I had to write I ended up like my letter of recommendation said that he would be good. He's spent some time on the floor, so he'd be good to go on the floor immediately. That was because he was so bad in every other aspect. Yeah, I mean, they're different generation, man. It's
I think
like the willingness to read. Like
Yeah.
reading, dude, getting these kids to read, holy shit, like it's not happening. I can remember, dude, like I'd pull out Super Training, uh, I don't know, all these books that are behind me. You mentioned periodization earlier, dude. I remember getting that book and being so excited to read it. Like, and it just, if it's not 30 seconds to 90 seconds long and in vertical, format,
Yeah. It's
they're not interested, man. Most of them.
it's a challenge, and I think they're limiting their ability to help people. And at the end of
Absolutely.
the day, if you ask someone, a young intern is like, "Why are you doing this?" Like, I want to help people. It's like, well, the only way that you can help people is to educate yourself and to give yourself the biggest opportunity to do that.
Right.
So if you're limiting your education, you're ultimately limiting your ability to help people.
Right.
Um, to me, reading is something that is so unique. Like you can listen to information, whether it's a podcast or an ebook or even like a YouTube video, and you can consume that, but your ability to actually internalize the information is only going to be realized through reading.
Right.
And I think we read so much through our education because we didn't have online learning.
Right.
So there is a bit of a disconnect there. So I think, we talked off like the race to zero when it comes to education and AI being able to answer questions. I'll put it to you this way. So if AI can answer so many questions, who's going to teach them what questions to ask?
That's the issue you run into, right? Like, I don't know that this generation coming up is going to have the skill set to do it. You know what I mean? Because you've got to the large language model is only as valuable as the information that you can put into it, right? So if you've got a generation of shit, dude, you see it, like, not to get political and stuff, but you see it within our politics, dude. If it's not a headline or like a 15-second, clip, like it didn't happen, and it's the same thing, and that's just not just the generation coming up, dude. That's the boomers and the Gen Xers and the millennials, us. Yeah, the whole world's changed from that perspective. And if you don't have the ability to have valuable input into these LLMs, then the output's going to be suspect. And like, I don't know that this generation coming up is going to have the skill set to do it.
So you've got a really unique opportunity within the four walls of your gym,
Right.
to provide these kids with something different. How do you do that? I think that should be the question that you're asking yourself every day.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I'm probably like you. So it has gotten now where, let's say 15 years ago, right? Who were your athletes on the gym floor who most often wanted to know why and how it was going to help them? Like, what kind of athlete was that, right? It was 9 times out of 10. It was the women athletes, almost always. Like, they were inquisitive. Yeah. They wanted to know. But it was like baseball, hockey, and that was usually it, man, because the football guys have had it beat into them. Just do what you're told and balls out, do what you're told, don't ask questions, right? But I'm finding that kids today are at least a little bit more inquisitive. They're more like those hockey and baseball players. They kind of want to know why, and being able to tell them why we're doing something has become like huge. You can see the gears turning in their head sometimes. Like, of course, You're going to have the kids who just, they don't give a shit. They don't care. But then, I'd say like a lot of athletes are, what did Matt call them back in the day? Some kind of consumer. I forget, man. That athletes want to know more, right? They want to know more. They want to know the why. And our Mondays with Mac would talk about that. You remember those?
I do. I remember being yelled at a lot.
Oh, yeah. That was interesting.
So bringing it back, right? Bringing it back to that relationship building piece. So yeah, social media and the education world as it exists right now, it's I would say it's on the whole, it's worse than it was when we were around.
Yeah.
But if you know that these kids are more willing to consume information, now you can leverage that into building better relationships and to creating an atmosphere in your weight room that fosters learning. And so this is another area where nothing is ever all good or all bad. It's an opportunity. And it's that opportunity is on you as the coach to find a way to connect to that athlete. So if the athletes are changing, you yourself have to change. Your approach
Yeah.
has to change. The methodologies you have to change. And to me, that again brings back the art of coaching, the art of relationship building. And that's what's going to separate those coaches who get the results that they want to get and the coaches that end up floundering and aren't able to do what they need to do.
Yep. No, completely agree. It's be interesting to see what AI does end up doing to even the online stuff, the education space. Like it'll be interesting, man, because it's I had Grok just when Grok first came out. You know, that's Twitter's AI.
Yep.
So I asked it to put together like a West Side Influence template where I trained X amount of days, and this is what I wanted the outcome to be, and this was like my maxes, and periodize it out, dude. Like 10 seconds, it had you know what I mean, like spit all of it out, and it's wild, dude. But I will say, to what you were talking about earlier, like a lot of consumers like do need that guidance and that coach. They cannot just be said, hey, this is what you're doing. We're going to have to explain some things. We're going to have to manipulate some variables here and there. People want accountability and they want to be told, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like,
Absolutely.
but
Absolutely.
I think that'll
And
be something important moving forward.
that is going to be important. And that's what you can leverage. I had one of my mentees had one of their clients put their parameters into ChatGPT and ask, like, what should my meet prep look like?
Yeah.
And they presented it to the coach and was like, hey, coach, I think this is what my meet prep should look like. And the coach was like super offended. And I was like,
Yeah.
no, this is your opportunity.
Yeah.
This is your opportunity to ingrain in this individual the importance of coaching,
Right.
the importance of context, the importance of tracking metrics over time and adjusting the plan based on life circumstances and all of the other things that AI will not be able to do.
Yeah.
So now you're in a position where, yeah, these things are fantastic, but they're never going to replace people. They will replace people who don't use AI.
Yeah.
And that's where for me in the education space, I'm actually working on building out my own GPT.
Okay.
I'm working on building out my own large language learning model based on the content and the education that I've already put out, because I think that's going to be valuable for people.
Yeah.
To be able to access my knowledge on, training, business, these types of things that they're not going to get from a chat GPT.
Yeah. I mean, you can think you could leverage your online stuff with that by adding, like, let's say you've got your app, right? Everybody's excited about the app. Being able to have your client directly communicate with the AI, like not over major things, but like within a training session, like this happened, right? What's my next step, right? This isn't working today. Where do I go? Because they're not going to be able to get a hold of you right away necessarily. But to be able to have that, that's going to be a valuable tool if you can figure that out, like at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's where we're headed.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. All right, man. Well, I've got a couple questions I want to ask you. Looks like we've been at this for almost an hour. 3 books you thought were important when you first got into the field versus 3 books that actually became important. I'd say 2 to 3 books that actually were important.
That's a great question. So 3 books that I thought were going to be important. Obviously, Science and Practice by Verkhoshansky, Super Training by Mel Siff, and then West Side Book of Methods was one of my favorite books. And to be honest, the things that are actually important, I'm looking at. I read a book on cognitive behavioral therapy that was phenomenally impactful. I'm trying to look at my bookcase here. Oh. Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged.
Okay, yeah.
You know what? I'll give a shout out to Andy Galpin here. Unplugged.
Okay. Yeah.
Unplugged was a great book.
I'll have to check. What's the like? What's it about?
The premise is, the proliferation of technology and wearable devices and how those aren't actually the best metrics.
Okay.
So it gave me the opportunity to think about like leveraging the personal relationship on top of the technology. So I thought that was great.
Yeah, I mean, it's been wild watching Andy's career, like the past, yeah, 50 or 10 years maybe. I don't know. From him doing episodes of like Barbell Shrugged to kind of,
Yep.
being the dude, man. Interesting guy to say the least, for sure. What was your favorite internship experience at the University of South Florida?
I think one of the most memorable ones. So there was an intern. I'm not going to say his name, but he's from Bowling Green.
Okay. Dude, what was
Remember,
it?
remember when I know his name? I'm just not going to say it. Uh, remember when he was the loudest, most obnoxious dude, and I remember one day he was coaching. I'm going to say coaching in
Right.
quotation marks, and he stepped in a hole and broke his
Oh,
foot.
broke his leg, yeah.
Yeah, that was fucking hilarious.
Yeah, I remember him, man. He was interesting. Like I said, we had some AAA players and we had some rec kids on that
Yep.
15 person internship roster there. Dude, Petrosino yelling hamstrings. I'll never forget that.
Oh my
Remember,
God.
because Mac wanted, yeah, Mac would yell out the next stretch, and then he wanted all of us to yell it out too. And Jen was like the only one that did it, and it was hamstrings. um, let's see. Most valuable training tool, or what did you think was your most valuable training tool when you first started as a coach versus like what's kind of surprised you as being like the most valuable training tool as you've gotten into your career? It could be anything from like wearable tech to a principal to anything.
Yeah, so I think the most valuable thing that I thought initially was the barbell,
Yep.
and the most valuable thing to me now is my as corny as it sounds, it's the heart, man.
Okay.
It's like how you connect with people.
Okay. Yeah. Same kind of boat, man. I think everything as you get into it changes, right? Because you come into the field and you're pretty staunch in your beliefs because your circle of knowledge is so small, right? And then as that circle grows, so does the circumference of darkness around it. So the more the more you learn, right, the more you realize like you don't know shit like at all.
Yep.
And then who's a strength coach that you think everyone should be paying attention to from like either a content or like a writing perspective or whatever that seems to be flying under the radar right now?
Oh, dude, there are so many amazing coaches
You give
out there.
like 2 to 5 of them if you got a few. You can do more than one.
So someone who I think is going to be coming out with a lot of content in the near future is also running a mentorship program now for young coaches. Is Danny Lamartina.
Okay.
Danny's a physical therapist. She's a top 5 all-time powerlifter. She's also an Olympian, bodybuilding Olympian in
Okay.
the women's physique division. She has completely changed the paradigm with which I look at training. Someone else who's putting out a lot of amazing content and has collaborated with people all over the industry is Dr. Mike T. Nelson.
Okay.
Mike just co-wrote Triphasic 2 with Cal Dietz.
Okay. Man, that
Phenomenal.
finally came out, huh? So I don't mean to
Yeah.
interrupt you, but he's been talking about that for 15 years now.
9 years it took him to rewrite the
That's
book.
crazy.
So Mike T, other coaches that are, man, I have, if you want a list of coaches who are running under the radar, check out my podcast, the Coaches Corner U podcast. That's like all the coaches that I interview are people who you should probably know about, but don't.
Okay. Yeah, we'll link all of it in the description. I had one more question I wanted to ask. Jesus. Yeah, it's escaping me right now.
It's okay, dude. It's episode 1.
Yeah,
you'll have it all.
We'll have literally tens of viewers, so be ready. Damn. Oh well, we'll shut it down there, man. Did you have anything that you wanted to kind of pimp that you want people to check out on your end?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're interested in online coaching, whether for whatever you're looking for, www.masterathletic.com. If you're a young coach looking to learn more, www.coachescorneru.com. We also have the Coaches Corner University podcast that's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Android, all over the place, where I do interview coaches who you probably should know about. And I talk a lot about, special people who do special things for amazing people. And then, if you're interested in anything that I have to offer on Instagram, you can find me at Paul Oneid. I'm also on TikTok, but I don't. My assistant posts for me because I don't want to be on that. To me, TikTok is cancer, but I know I have to have it, so it's there. Yeah, that's pretty much it, man.
All right, man. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah,
yeah, man. We'll have to do this again sometime in the future.
100%. I'll have you on my podcast.
All right, yeah,
have a
perfect,
chat.
man. All
Sounds
right,
good.
yep. See you later, bud.
Test the heat, more muscle.